Okay, so what if the absolute foundation of everything we've been taught about human history is just wrong? Today, we're unpacking a viral internet narrative that literally asks us to reevaluate our entire past. Let's just dive right into it. We're talking about the crazy, reality-bending mystery of Tartaria. Now, the premise here is just massive. Imagine a lost, highly advanced civilization that stretched all the way from the edges of Europe right across to the Pacific. This narrative argues that the biggest empire to ever exist wasn't just defeated in battle. It was actually intentionally, systematically erased from our collective memory. And look, the sources don't pitch this as some fairy tale. They present it as a genuine historical mystery about a world that standard textbooks say, well, basically shouldn't have existed. So on old maps, you'll see it bearing a very specific name, Grand Tartaria. According to the proponents of this theory, this is the exact empire modern history wants you to completely forget about. We're not talking about some empty, primitive wasteland here. They claim it was a thriving, completely unified, and super technologically advanced society.
The Forgotten Empire. Clues in cartography. Let's see what the old maps actually tell us.
Right, so how does an officially documented empire just vanish into thin air? Well, proponents point straight to 17th and 18th century cartography. And actually, Grand Tartaria wasn't some French concept back then. It was literally officially recognized in early editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Plus, it was plotted out by some of the most world-renowned cartographers of that era.
Now, standard history tells us this huge region was basically just home to scattered, nomadic tribes, right? But the Tartarian theory comes in and asks a pretty interesting question. Why would a loose region of nomads have its own official flag, a recognized emperor, and a totally unique alphabet? Because, those are the absolute hallmarks of a highly structured, unified empire.
Evidence in plain sight. Let's talk about global architecture.
The source material actually urges us to just look around at the stone structures in our own cities. From the streets of Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, all the way to the historic centers of Moscow and London, we see these massive, breathtaking buildings that look almost identical. And proponents argue that this totally unified architectural blueprint implies a single, global builder, not just a bunch of isolated local architects who miraculously made the exact same design choices on completely different continents.
So, official history claims these absolute monuments were built by 1800 societies. People using horses, buggies, simple hand tools, that kind of thing. But the Tartaria theory, it completely rejects this. It suggests that those complex metal spires you see on top of these old buildings, they weren't just decorative. They were actually atmospheric energy collectors, literally pulling free electricity right out of the air to power an entire civilization. Crazy, right?
The mud flood catastrophe. A global reset.
Okay, so you might be wondering, how do you erase a global empire practically overnight? Well, the answer, according to the source, is the mud flood. This is a proposed global cataclysm that supposedly covered the entire world in several feet of mud. It rapidly wiped out the Tartarian population and acted like a literal reset button on humanity, leaving these grand, technologically advanced cities completely empty. And again, the source asks you to look around your own downtown. Have you ever noticed older buildings where the first floor windows are strangely half buried below the sidewalk, or historic doors that lead straight into a brick basement wall? Proponents argue these aren't just quirky architectural choices. They say it's literal, physical proof that the ground level was drastically raised by a massive influx of mud.
Which leads us to a pretty fascinating twist. After the mud finally settled, the survivors, which would be our more recent ancestors, they simply moved into these empty, pre-built urban utopias. They dug out the streets, claimed these absolute masterworks of architecture as their own creations, and supposedly rewrote history to say, hey, we built this ourselves with some basic hand tools. Conspiracy or cover-up?
Let's get to the final question here.
We really have to look at the sheer magnitude of what's being proposed by this narrative. Is Tartaria simply modern internet myth-making, or could it genuinely be the greatest cover-up in human history? Because it asks us to imagine a past where humanity had mastered limitless, clean energy and unparalleled artistic architecture. And it makes you question, were we truly robbed of that utopian heritage?
The source material leaves us with this really provocative final thought. Quote, "The truth is buried in the stone. You just have to know where to look." And whether you completely buy into this theory or not, it undeniably changes how you view a simple brick basement or an old downtown spire. If the physical world is the ultimate history book, what story is your city telling you?